I want you to get together.
One thing we are talking about right now, which is AI, big topic. This is like people are terrified of this concept, and obviously jobs are one thing, but let's get weird about it. How do you think this links to transhumanism anyway? What's the end goal for AI here? What's your theory? You got get unhinged for me. What's going on?
I mean, I think that they've been priming us to see humans as the enemy of the earth for a long time. And when you realize that that comes down to the old gods are saying enough, we hate you and we want to be rid of you. And I think one thing that we're realizing is that the fallen angels are a lot more like AI than we thought. It's like they've been propelling us toward their technology a long time and directing our technology to conform to their image. So I think that the end game is that they want humans to either die out or conform to their image, and they want our bodies.
Have you ever heard of a book called Run or Dodge in Hell?
I've not. No.
Okay, so it's long and boring, and I'm not saying I recommend it, but the concept is interesting. And the concept is that immortality will be achieved through plugging yourself into a computer. That you can map the brain, you can put the brain into a computer, and the computer can make you live on forever. So, like, you want my most unhinged theory is that in Revelation, when it says they'll wish for death and they'll be unable to die, I think it's very possible that that is exactly what it's talking about. That people are going to plug themselves into the machines, and the machines are going to take over. And they demons want bodies, right? Like they want bodies, and we're just going to give ours up to be in these machines. Did you guys see that whole thing about, I can't remember the guy's name, is it Tim Altman or what? Sam Altman with OpenAI last, like a few weeks ago? There was that whole thing where he got fired. Microsoft picked him up, then he went back to OpenAI, and there was like this whole power struggle. And there's this theory going on right now that the reason that that happened is because he actually discovered or developed AGI, which is basically like the thing that Elon Musk is like, doomsday warning people about, that like AI will actually take that next step. And there's this whole conspiracy that that is exactly where it's going. And it's worrying me because it's like every step of the last year, we've been kind of talking about AI and saying, this is maybe where it's going, this is maybe what's happening. And like we kept being right about some things that are freaking out, like the whole Elon Musk thing. We said very early on that I think he bought Twitter to get the algorithm data. He needs to be able to see, like free speech is important to Twitter because they need to actually see how humans would react to situations. So whenever you get on Twitter now, you see somebody that's like, explain your ethnicity in 2 pictures. And it'll be like spaghetti and a sombrero or something like that. It'll be like all these things. Or like, show me a picture of you 10 years ago. Or like all these things. I'm like, I don't think people realize that somebody's putting these out there to train AI. Like the whole point of getting everybody to be like, how do you associate items with concepts? How do you associate yourself with pictures? It's all part of the AI learning. And so he said this about Elon Musk early on. He was saying we need to stop, we need to take a 6-month moratorium. And I'm like, he doesn't mean this. And we found out he didn't mean this because he literally launched XAI while he was saying that. Like he literally bought Twitter, launched his own AI program. So like everybody's fighting for control of AI. I think this is why China needs to steal data from Americans, because in China you have no freedom of speech. Like people are afraid to say what they really think. So in order for China to get good data on how to build their AI, they have to steal it from Americans. They have to have TikTok. They have to do whatever. Mark Zuckerberg, we already went through that whole thing on an episode where it's like the point of this, and this is like open stuff now. I've heard like mainstream media saying Elon Musk owns Twitter to get the data. Mark Zuckerberg, there was a conspiracy theory before. Now it's completely out in the open that Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook to get data. It was lifelong. It was all to like learn how humans think and interact with each other. So like everybody's out for this AI. Everybody's got plans for it. And because they're all like, if we don't do it first, you're going to do it. Like that race to like being the best has made people completely like take the safeguards and the rails off. So when I hear people like Altman might have developed the next evolution in AI, I'm not thinking that it's crazy anymore. You know what I mean? Like I think that there's something to be worried about there, because all the people who know way better than I do, I don't understand AI, they're all saying, here's the dangers. We're worried about the dangers. But unless I like rush headfirst into this research and build the thing first, then China will have it. someone else will have it. So like nobody's thinking clearly about like what the implications are. And the only people who seem to be clearly thinking about the implications are theologians. And theologians are all saying we need to develop an AI religion. Like we've seen these stories happening over the last year. Like people are going to worship the AI. Like I'm sorry, I'm going a little unhinged here, throwing a lot of stuff out. I'm very worried about AI is my point. So,
Yeah.
you know, anybody who's in control is like worried enough to like pause it because they know that if they do, the next guy won't. So it's like a catch-22, you know?
It's like the race for nuclear power. Like
Yeah.
everybody who was racing toward it knew it was a terrible, terrible, awful thing, and they couldn't stop because whoever got there first was going to win the world war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. But this is the irony. You were talking about it earlier, and I've had a similar theory. You were explaining, you know, everyone will plug themselves into the AI with the promise of immortality. You know, and that I've been saying that for years. Like I used to theorize about this before I got kicked off like 6 years ago. You know, because I could see like this future arising that is kind of they're going to promise immortality somehow, and I was speculating on how this could be, and I'd imagine there's some giant big black cube or something which is like a database for all of humanity's consciousness, which you can plug yourself into and live out a virtual reality beautiful life for eternity or something. And I always thought if they do this for the sake of getting our bodies, let's say, there's the trick is there is no afterlife in there, you just die. But what they've done is they'll plug somebody in front of you, and on the screen you'll see them going into the new world and living their amazing life in the new light bodies. That's just a video they have on play on loop. That's not actually happening. You know what I mean? Whoever plugs themselves in just drops dead instantaneously. And everyone who watches it is believing they're going on to live for eternity, and it's just gonna be one of those. It's literally just gonna be a mass culling of humanity through this promise of immortality. But the truth is, it's just, can we get your vessel empty for these other things that are on the other side?
They wanted our bodies for forever.
Yeah, and is that kind of like the unforgivable sin? Is that kind of like blaspheming the Holy Ghost? It's kind of God promised an eternity after all this, but instead
it is, to be honest. And Vicky Joy Anderson is one of the people who first turned me on to this theory, and the way she described it, I was like very convinced that she's onto something with it. So
yeah,
if we're gonna talk about like an unforgivable sin, like blaspheming the Holy Spirit, like trying to gain your own eternity, your own afterlife without God, I can't imagine anything else fitting the criteria of that perfectly.
Yeah, well, people will argue to the death about what actually sin is, you know. But I love to speculate, and I've talked to Vicky about this, and I think, you know, I said the same thing about this whole idea. It's just going to be one big long con. They're going to sell it to us that it's this amazing new technology that can make us live forever and be like gods. But the trick is, you just die. Like that's all it is. It never even existed. The technology. It was just a lie to get you to kill yourself, basically. Yeah, like the technology, it doesn't even exist. You know what I mean? It's impossible to transfer consciousness, is what I'm trying to say. Like that's actually a myth that they're trying to sell to us as a possibility through media. But the truth of the matter is, you can't. They're not gods. They can't transfer your consciousness out of this God-created vessel into a machine. Like, of course they can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, it's impossible. But
I just realized they did this whole like transferring consciousness bit in science a few years ago. It was a whole thing, and people probably missed it. But have you ever heard of like head transferring?
What, where they literally transfer a head? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. It was like, but that was the idea, is that you could transfer the consciousness from one body to another, and they're doing it by literally chopping people's heads off and moving them to other bodies. And all they were doing was killing people. But like, there was a lot of scientists dumping a lot of money in this concept that you could transfer the consciousness between different bodies. It was a whole thing. Metal Gear Solid 5 did like this thing out. I'll probably cover it in a future video, but yeah.
That's a very materialistic way of viewing consciousness, though. It's just the brain. You're just the brain, right? That's all we are. It doesn't work like that. You know, it's if you get the spirit realm involved, it gets way more complicated to what we actually are as creatures. We're living souls, and what that actually means is trippy, okay? Because it involves the body and it involves everything else, and it gets really weird. I don't think, this is my theory, unhinged. They cannot transfer consciousness, but they are going to make it seem like they can. That's the long
goal. Imitate it, right? We know they can imitate it. We know they can imitate voices with AI. We know that they can imitate personality with AI.
Video.
We know now, like people are already getting scammed because somebody who sounds and seems just like their son calls them up and says, "Dad, I need bail money. Can you send it to my bank account?" or something like that. So you can kill somebody and then have the computer talk to them to their family members, and it seemed like a completely real conversation.
This is already happening with what's that app? There's an app out there, Replica AI. They're literally calling it a Ouija board, as in they're selling it to people, saying you can speak to your dead loved ones.
Yes.
And in fact, I think it was in October that they just like foregone all of the pretenses and they just called it a Ouija board, and they said, "Here's our AI Ouija board."
Yes.
Because they like themed it around October. So like since the beginning of it, Replica AI was created by a woman whose husband died and she wanted to speak to her husband again. So she creates an AI to speak to her husband, and now they're just selling it to people to speak to your dead loved ones. So that whole idea of like mimicking dead people is already not just like in theory, it's in practice, and it's something you can download on an Android for free. It's insane.
Someone in
Just to step away briefly, I'll be right back.
That's fine. So someone in the comments section says, brain cells have been interfaced with computer chips, but that's not the same thing as transferring consciousness, is what I'm trying to say here. I do think there is this transhumanist agenda to merge mankind with more mechanical properties. Sure,
Yeah.
replace an arm with a mechanical arm, replace the whole body with a mechanical body eventually, I think that could be possible. But in terms of like what your essence is as a soul, as a consciousness, we do not understand. People do not understand that. Go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was saying you nailed it earlier when you said that there's this whole intertwine between the body and the spirit. And this is why Gnosticism is so important, is because Gnosticism has this belief that the body and the spirit are two totally separate things, that they're not, like uniquely interlaced as the Bible tells us. It's what I'm always saying to people is like the first step to get people into Gnosticism, because Gnosticism started in the church. It started as a way to be like, well, I shouldn't say it started there. People get mad at me because you can trace roots back to Egypt. But I'm saying the Christian Gnosticism started in the early church, and all it said was Christ was completely spiritual. He didn't have a real body. There wasn't this fully God, fully man concept, this whole very important thing. And it's the first thing that people will start to go into is that, it's all spiritual. Everything's spiritual. Nothing is physical. And they just keep going down this route. And it's like, if you are off by 1 degree over a length of time, you're like an ocean apart, right? And that's exactly where this leads. So what you're saying about consciousness is so true, but you can't understand that from a Gnostic point of view, where consciousness and body are complete separate entities.
Well, the thing is, transhumanism and Gnosticism are like best friends, because Gnostics believe this is a disgusting prison, flesh prison for our spirit, that we need to break free from, and the evil demiurge has created this physical, brutal place for us to live in these prison bodies, and we need to break some. There's many ways of getting out of it with many different tangents that different sects go off of, but
Sure.
The idea is, don't go into the light, you're just being soul recycled. I hear that quite a lot, things like that. And it's this, basically, it's spitting on God's creation. This body is a prison. I don't want to be in it. My soul is trapped in this body, like you described. That's what they believe. It's two separate things, and the spirit is better than the other, and I don't believe that, and I don't think that's biblical at all. I think the physical and the spiritual world are one thing, and our physical bodies and our spirit and soul are also the same thing. One will not exist without the other. That's kind of how I see it.
And talking about the Gnostic heresies that have gotten into the Christian world, like this is why we have such a hard time talking to Christians about any of the Nephilim stuff, because they think that angels are purely physical or purely spiritual beings. There's no physicality to them. They ignore all the things in the Bible, like how God put a baby in Mary's womb, like supposed to be a completely spiritual being, physical. They could never interact. We have angels kicking people, eating things, walking on land, and like there's so many examples in the Bible of the angels doing physical things, but they believe that there's a complete separation between the physical and the spiritual, and therefore they can't understand Nephilim, and they have to reinterpret Genesis 6:4 as the sons of Seth or some nonsense that's just not accurate. Then they have to ignore Numbers 13:33, and they have to ignore you have to ignore Peter and Jude and things that Jesus mentioned, things that Paul mentioned, all to fit this theory that's not even Christian in its nature. It's Gnostic in its nature.
I want you to get together